Hi, and welcome to the first episode of Geelong Chats. Off the top, I'd like to say a massive thank you for actually giving this episode a chance, especially to those outside of my family and friends who I'm pretty certain will be listening to this out of sympathy and to give me a little bit of confidence. For a long time, I've had an interest in doing a podcast, but have easily found excuses not to do it. More recently, I made an Instagram account with the Geelong Chats name and put a blue and white Geelong coloured microphone, almost to give myself that extra motivation to actually do a podcast one day. So to start this season, I started posting videos on Instagram and YouTube about my Geelong Cats collection, including videos of opening Guernseys and a couple of videos about what I've created so far. However, I thought I better actually get behind the microphone and record an episode, so here we are. My initial plan for my first episode would be to talk about how I became a Geelong fan and to share some stories of my years supporting the Cats. However, I thought that might be a bit boring and people might not be interested in that. So I've gone with a different approach. Recently, I've posted a couple of videos, one in particular about my Geelong 2022 Grand Final Guernseys that's generated a bit of attention and actually provided heaps of questions from fellow Cats fans and just Guernsey collectors around Australia. So I thought, why not use those questions as the basis for this first episode? One of the common questions I've had over the last few weeks is how many Guernseys do I actually have in my collection? At last count, in terms of match-worn and player-issued Guernseys, I've got about 44 of them. That includes 2 that are coming in the mail, hopefully this week or the week after, from official memorabilia and a purchase I did on eBay. I've been collecting since 2008, so that number does sound pretty big, but over the last 18 years, that's, I guess, 2 or 3 per year. Certainly slowed down over the last few years having a wife and kids, where a lot of the money's needed to go to things more important than Geelong Guernsey collecting. With the 44 match-worn and player-issued Guernseys I've got, my approach has been to try to get 1 per player. I know other collectors out there have got several, like 10 or more particular players, which is completely fine, and part of the appeal of collecting is you can do it your own way. But for me, I like to have 1 at most per player, and 1 of each different design that the Cats have worn. Obviously more than 1 of the home Guernsey, but for the special edition ones, I just try to get at least 1. In terms of the players I try to get whenever the auctions come up, I like to try to get players who've got a premiership or accolades like an All-Australian, a Cargie Greaves medal, a Brownlow ideally too, if there's a couple of those players out there. But anyone really with an award to their name is probably the ones I go for first. But ultimately, I'm just happy to get any in the match-worn auctions they do from time to time. A common question I've received over the last few weeks has been, how do you actually get these Guernseys? In terms of the match-worn Guernseys, the easiest way is through the official memorabilia auctions. So usually, for the Cats anyway, on the Thursday before a game where they're wearing a special edition Guernsey, they'll actually list the Guernseys for sale. And then the Thursday after is when the auctions usually finish. They tend to finish the auctions in numerical order, so with number 1 being Reece Stanley all the way to 46 for Mark Blitzarves, which can make it really tricky, especially when you're keen on players at the end of the auction, but you don't want to miss out on a player at all. So you kind of inevitably, or I do, go for someone a bit higher up the number order. In terms of the official memorabilia auctions, it really depends on whether the club wants to sell the Guernseys or not. On the weekend just gone, the Cats had that great win in the whiteout game against the Suns, but they haven't actually listed the Guernseys for sale as yet. So fingers crossed they actually do, because I'm pretty desperate to get one. Another way that you can get a Guernsey is through the club auctions. Years ago, the club would do all the auctions themselves, but now they're using official memorabilia. But still at the end of the year in particular, and at the Cargie Greaves medal night, the club still does their own auctions from time to time. Some people are a bit more brave and courageous than me, go directly to players. I guess they're quite lucky too if they've got that connection or the courage to do it. But some people do go directly to the players to get their Guernseys. I've never done that myself, so I'm not too sure how much a player will ask for, but I can imagine they could really name their own price. Probably the easiest way, depending on the availability, is to go through eBay or Facebook Marketplace. I know there's actually a couple of Geelong Cats Guernsey collector groups out there on Marketplace that do their own sales, so you can check that out and try your luck and see what's available. I actually have a couple of Guernseys for sale on there at the moment myself. Another frequent question I've received recently is how much do the Guernseys cost? That's a really hard question to answer, and probably easier by describing the 3 groups or 3 tiers of Guernseys you can get. So first of all, there's the retail Guernseys. So they're the Guernseys you can just get for sale at the Cat Shop or any like Rebel Sport or any retail shop. They're the Guernseys that come looking like exactly like the players wear on the weekend. However, they haven't got the number on the back. Those ones obviously are just your stock standard prices as per the sale prices at those shops. The next level or the next tier I would say is the player issued Guernseys. So these are the ones that are printed and custom made for the players, that have the number printed on the back. So not the ironed on versions, but the actual printed on one where you can actually see it's just part of the actual print. Those ones, say, if they're not worn, so I guess collectors or other Guernseys purchasers out there call it a player-issued Guernsey when it isn't worn, but was custom-made for a player. Those ones go for a little bit higher than the retail Guernseys do, just because they've got the number on the back that isn't an ironed-on number that you can just buy at the shops, and it is custom-fitted for a player. You'll be able to tell if it's a player-issued one compared to a retail one to the ironed on numbers, obviously because they're not ironed on, or it'll have the GPS pouch at the back of the Guernsey on the player's neck in there as well. So you can tell a player issued Guernseys from those signs. The third tier is the match worn Guernseys. So a few obvious tells there. One is that the Guernseys will usually be pretty dirty, depending on, I guess, the weather and how in and under the player gets. Joel Selwood is a bit of an example in terms of a Geelong player. His Guernseys, at least the couple I've had my hands on over the years, come back pretty filthy. Some people tell me it looks a bit weird having a dirty Guernsey, but I think it's a great look, and I'd much rather have a really dirty one than a clean one. It's obvious, I guess, then when someone walks past, if I just look at it, that it's a match-worn one, and I think it's even more valuable if it's a bit dirty or really dirty. In terms of how the price differs, well, it really does depend on two things, the player and the club. So again, obviously, talking about Geelong in the first instance, there's a top echelon of players that generally go for a lot more than others in the club auctions. So you're looking at players like Paddy Dangerfield, Jeremy Cameron, Bailey Smith in the last couple of years. His numbers are crazy in terms of how much his Guernseys are selling for. Ollie Dempsey, I guess because he's one of the rising star, his ones have been going for a fair bit and regularly ticking over $1,000. Tom Stewart, 5-time All-Australian, best and fairest winner, premiership player. His ones pretty regularly go over $1,000 as well. Then you've probably got your players who are pretty good players or much loved players, like my favourite Tommy Atkins, Zach Guthrie, Jack Henry, Sean Manor, you name them. They could go anywhere between $400, $500, $600, depending, I guess, if it's a really cool design or a great win. They're usually around that mark. The auctions generally start for match-worn ones around $250, creep up to $300. Like I said, depends on the player though. Depends on the type of game they had, like Shawnee Manor's game against Brisbane a few weeks ago. That really pushed his value up for that Guernsey in particular compared to other weeks, perhaps where he might not get as much. Another factor that can influence the price is the club you go for. So going outside of the Cats for a little bit here, not that I do that very often, I really don't buy any Guernseys other than the Geelong ones, but you probably heard, if you're a footy fan, the price for the Scotty Pendlebury Guernseys this year. The two classic examples for him is the Anzac Day game from this year, or Anzac Day Guernsey, where he obviously was best of field and got his 4th Anzac medal. That one fetched a pretty tidy $32,000, which is just an insane amount of money. That's like a mortgage deposit, at least for some people. A crazy amount of money for a Guernsey, but hey, when there's people out there, and especially Collingwood fans, there's so many of them, there was obviously multiple people outbidding each other to get it to that number. But then that was completely blown out of the water by his games record-breaking Guernsey that fetched $101,000. So that is a real outlier. Guernseys don't go for that every week or every time they're auctioned, but that one in particular obviously has a fair bit of value, being a potentially once-in-a-lifetime Guernsey. Once in my lifetime anyway, I assume. Unless Paddy Dangerfield goes for another 6 years perhaps, but I don't know if he's got that in him, even Paddy. Another one you might recall is Dustin Martin's 2020 Grand Final Guernsey. Sorry to bring that up for Cats fans. I was actually there that night and he was insane. It's the only time I've ever watched Dustin Martin live, and yeah, he was pretty good that night, in the second half in particular, to break all our hearts. But that Guernsey, that went for $75,000. And again, I think it depends on the club, and Richmond fans, there's a lot of them out there, and obviously there was someone or multiple people that were willing to outbid each other to get to $75,000. Another question I've been receiving is, how do I display them? You might see in a couple of videos I've posted online, I've made a couple of frames for my Guernseys. You might see the rack in the rack I've got on my wall, because I've just completely run out of wall space in my rumpus room, what's now the kids' rumpus room, sorry. It used to be my own Geelong room, but I run out of wall space for the frame, so I actually bought a rack at IKEA. And I've got them up on coat hangers because there's so many. I've got a couple of mannequins that I think look really cool, but they take up a lot of space and the kids tend to go for them. So they're the main ones. Official memorabilia from time to time do like a special box or a tin. The boxes that used to make them were absolutely gigantic. They looked really cool, but they do take up a lot of space too. The metal tins that have been coming in more recently, I think are quite tidy. While they haven't got, the ability to open them like the box does, they take up less space, and you can tuck them away a little bit easier. The Anzac Day Guernsey I got last year with Jack Bowes, that came just in a little cardboard envelope. Nice and small and tidy, but a bit of a shame, I guess, to tuck it away. But when you've got 44 of them, you can't display all of them, obviously. Well, I can't anyway. When I first started collecting in 2008, I was living at home with my dad. I was single. I had a fair bit of money I could actually spend and went a bit crazy collecting Guernseys growing up. When I met my wife and we started designing a house, we had the floor plan set out and I was really keen to have a Geelong Cats pool room. That did happen for a few years there. Had a pool table, all the Guernseys up. And it was a complete Geelong man cave. Still is a bit of a man cave to this day, but now with 3 kids, the floor plan, I know inevitably will require this to become a bedroom, so I will need to downsize in the next couple of years. So I'm kind of dreading the day when I need to pull all or most of them or all of them down to make way for a kid's room. So I'm not too sure what I'll actually do with the Guernseys then, but I'm kind of parking that one as a future problem to look after. A few collectors that I've been chatting to, and I've actually had the pleasure of chatting to a lot of collectors actually in the last few weeks in particular, that have got more Guernseys than I've got, that's for sure. And they've got even more impressive displays than I do in here. Have asked me what my favourite Guernseys are or what the best Guernseys are that I've got. Probably the top of the list is the 2022 Matchworn Zach Guthrie Grand Final Guernsey. Maybe it's a bit of recency bias creeping in there, but was so keen. I was there that day and I was really keen to get one in the auctions. Missed out in the auctions that night when they were sold. But finally, after a few years of going back and forth with another collector, managed to get that. So that's probably the top of the list for me. I've also got a 2011 Matthew Stokes Grand Final Guernsey from the Premiership win against Collingwood, which is fully signed and pretty cool. I'll try and put a video together on Instagram of that one. With another frame I might put together. Outside of that, I guess my Gary Ablett, number 29, before he left for the Suns, that's right up there. Paddy Dangerfield's Matchworn one, was lucky to get one of those while it was relatively affordable, I guess you could say. And likewise with Jeremy Cameron too. I think I've already said that Tommy Atkins is my favourite player, and I was pretty rapt when I got one of his Matchworn Guernseys from a couple of years ago. So they're probably my favourite ones. Oh, and how could I forget Joel Selwood? Absolutely have to have a Joel Selwood in my collection. And while a few people have asked me to buy it off me over the years, that's one player I will absolutely have to have. Even if I needed to sell lots of them, I'd make sure I retain the Joel Selwood one. I've also been asked a fair bit lately whether my Guernseys are for sale. I've never really thought about selling any of them, to be honest, but I've never been offered a lot of money for them either, so I guess everyone has their price, don't they? But at this point in time, the whole collection is absolutely not for sale. However, purchasing that Zach Guthrie Grand Final Guernsey a few months ago has led me to have a couple of his Guernseys. So I do have one of his Guernseys available for sale, not the Grand Final Guernsey, but a different one, the 2023 Indigenous Guernsey. I've also got a couple of 2017 and 2018 Indigenous Guernseys for sale. I've got them on Marketplace at the moment or in the Geelong Cats Guernsey Collectors Group. Or you could just message me too if you've got any interest in doing it. But otherwise, outside of those ones, not looking to sell any, but you never know. If you send me a message or something, it might be the right price, perhaps, especially when I need to downsize soon. Maybe I can move on a couple of them. But generally speaking, no. They're all just staying with me for the time being. Before I finish up for the episode, I hope you'll indulge me for just 1 or 2 more minutes. I'd just like to quickly talk about what my goals are for this podcast. I'm not using this at all to criticise or complain or critique the club, the players, the on-field performance or anything like that. I think there's already enough people out there in the industry that do a good job at that. And certainly I don't think it's the place of someone like me who played 3rd grade Canberra footy to criticise anything that goes on field or at the club. I honestly think any player that steps on the field for the Cats is pretty amazing, a lot better than I'll ever be at footy. And they're all out there to try and do their best. And really, we've had so much sustained success over the years that you can hardly complain about anything they've done. I will, though, I hopefully be able to use this platform to talk to other fans out there. I'm realistic. I'm not going to become the next Mark Howard and have a Howie game sort of podcast, but I'd absolutely love to talk to other fans out there or anyone who's got any small level of connection to the club. So if you've got any family or friends or anyone you think that has a cool story, then absolutely let me know. Send me a message or whatever through Instagram, YouTube, or my email address. I'd love to get connected with you and talk to you and perhaps, hey, maybe do an interview with you and share your stories too about your time supporting the Cats or your collection or anything else you've got you might like to share with the world. So thank you very much. I hope this first episode has been a little bit interesting and even a bit entertaining. Let me know if there's anything you'd like to hear about for me or just in general about the Cats, and we'll see what we can do next time. Thanks.
Go Cats! The Cat Attack! Geelong!